this is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right in heaven. I'll tell you how I became the Frog Prince of Group 11. In West York Hall, born and raised on the lab bench is where I spend most of my days, chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool and all, eating some flies inside out of school, when a couple of gals who were up to no good started making trouble in my body cavity. My brains got scared and my mom's did too. They said, we're gonna be doing fluid balance on you.
I begged and pleaded with her all through the day, but she cannulated my order and sent me on my way. She gave me a kiss, then she gave me my perfusion. As fluid dripped off my toes, I said I might as well kick it. First drug, yo, this is bad. Drinking dopamine out of a champagne glass. Is this what the frogs of York Hall living like? This might be alright. But then my drip rate and weight decreased, what a mess. Is this the type of drug that can cause these effects? I really think so, GS I reckon. I hope they're prepared for the Frog Prince of Group 11.
With a dose of potassium, I met my fate, and I yelled to the ladies, yo geeks, I'ma die now. I looked at my kingdom, I was finally in heaven to sit on my throne as the Frog Prince of Group 11. Welcome to Group 11 featuring Jerry, Talia, Maggie, Kate, and Ariel. This experiment examines the effects of dopamine, angiotensin 2, and potassium on the flow of fluid through blood vessels and across capillary walls in the frog. This will be measured by the number of drips off the frog's toes and by changes in the frog's weight due to water accumulating in or leaving the tissue using the transducer output. This will then give us a slope over time. The Starling equation describes the exchange of water between the interstitial tissue and the blood in capillaries. The amount of indirection of water flux is governed by the balance of forces driving water out of the capillary and the forces driving water back into the capillary. When phi is positive, then the net water flow is from the blood to the tissue, and if negative, then the net water flow is from the tissue into the blood. Ohm's law describes how the flow of fluid in a tube, Q, is affected by the driving pressure, change in P, and the resistance to flow, R. The setup involved removing the skin from both legs, then removing all internal organs except for the heart, lungs, and kidneys, then inserting a catheter into the left aorta. The mechanisms of vasodilation and vasocontraction are highly dependent on calcium concentration. Dopamine can interact with multiple G protein-coupled receptors. The DEEP1 receptor is coupled to a GS-alpha protein, which will activate adenylyl cyclase, which will convert ATP molecules into cyclic AMP molecules. These act as the second messenger within the cell and will stimulate protein kinase A, which will then stimulate activity of L-type calcium channels, so that more calcium can flow into the cell cytoplasm and will be available for shortening of the smooth muscle. The amount of calcium calmodulin complexes formed will be larger so that there will be more cross bridges formed between actin and myosin filaments in the muscle lining in the vessels, causing contraction. Dopamine will also interact with D5 receptor, which is coupled to G-alpha Q protein. The activation of the receptor will lead to the stimulation of phospholipase C, which will in turn activate both DAG and IP3. DAG will activate protein kinase C so that the L-type calcium channels are opened and the concentration of intracellular calcium can be increased by allowing the ion to flow down its concentration gradient. IP3 will bind to its receptor on the sarcoplasmic reticulum to initiate the release of calcium stores from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This increase in calcium systolic concentration will allow it to bind to calmodulin with more affinity. This complex will activate the myosin light chain kinase so that the myosin light chain is phosphorylated and allowed to form cross bridges with actin to stimulate muscle shortening. According to Ohm's law, if the resistance to the flow is increased, both the flow of the fluid and the pressure gradient are going to be decreased. If the flow is decreased, less amount of liquid will be able to drip out of the frog's toes. According to Starling's law, the sum of the forces driving components into capillaries is greater than the sum of the forces driving them out in this scenario. So, fluid will move from the interstitial compartment into the capillaries. This decrease in fluid within the frog's tissues is translated into a steady decrease in weight.
Angiotensin 2 is the primary hormone in the pathway that causes vasoconstriction and an increase in blood pressure. This hormone is associated with two main types of receptors, AT1 and AT2. AT1 is the most common in the heart and blood vessels, meaning that it's accountable for the effects in the circulatory system of the frog. AT1 is coupled to a GQ transduction pathway that will activate phospholipase C, or PLC. This is an amplifier enzyme that will convert membrane phospholipids into two types of messengers, DAG and IP3. Both of these messengers will go through a series of events that will result in the increase of calcium inside the cell. This increase in calcium will then allow for myosin heads to form cross bridges and contract the blood vessels of the frog. Vasoconstriction will result in the increase of resistance through the arteries. According to Ohm's law, if resistance increases, then flow will decrease. Less flow will lead to a drop in capillary pressure, which is also correlated to the drop in blood pressure. According to Starling's equation, this decrease in capillary pressure will result in more absorption. The more absorption, the more fluid coming back into the capillaries, which will result in a loss in weight.
When a solution of potassium ringers and dextrin was perfused into the frog, a subset of potassium channels called inward rectifier potassium channels became activated in response to the high concentration of extracellular potassium. When activated, these channels allowed potassium to flow down its concentration gradient into the cytosol of the smooth muscle cells that line the arterioles. Smooth muscle cells become hyperpolarized as a result of an abnormally high concentration of intracellular potassium. In response to this hyperpolarization, L-type calcium channels activated, allowing calcium to enter the cell in an effort to bring the cell back to its resting potential. When calcium entered the cell, it triggered smooth muscle contraction, resulting in widespread vasoconstriction of the arterioles. Vasoconstriction caused the radius of the vessels to decrease, resulting in an increased resistance which caused the flow of fluid through the vessels to decrease, leading to a decrease in drip rate. Because less fluid was able to flow from the arterioles to the capillaries, the capillary hydrostatic pressure decreased, resulting in a more negative flux. Due to the more negative flux, fluid was absorbed into the capillaries from the interstitial tissue and was able to leave the frog through the severed ventricle. This led to an increased rate of weight loss as the perfusion time increased due to greater amounts of calcium having to enter the cell in order to counter the effects of the high concentration of intracellular potassium.